Started, there may be some more people still kind of meandering, and some may be in their cars taking their afternoon nap. So we'll see. I don't know, but if you happen to be in here in the last session, the systems thinking, I didn't get quite finished, and I want to just talk about one little thing real quick, and then I'll jump into the structuring for growth because they really tie together. And this is really one kind of like what Kenneth was talking about. He had 3 hours worth of stuff to try to put in an hour. And I've tried to divide these up to 1 hour sessions, but some of them, kind of go together and overlap, and really systems and structure go together. So you kind of need to understand this, the concept of planning before we go into structure. So let me just real quick throw that in here, and then we'll move on. But at the end of the session last time, giving the 8 essential systems. What happens if your church needs to develop a system that's missing, or if you have a system that's in place but it's not functioning properly or it's broke? How do you fix it? And there's a process that we call strategic planning, and I know even like Rick Scroggins, I've heard him do some stuff and speak on strategic planning. There's different ways that you can actually do strategic planning. But let me just simplify it as easiest terms as I possibly can and say, if you're trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B, strategic planning is just the way to get there, okay? So basically what it means is right now we need a simulation system, and we don't have one, or the simulation system we have is inadequate or broken. So how do we fix it? So that process that you have to figure out between those two of where we are now and where we need to be is the strategic planning process. And basically what I encourage people to do is just sit down with a pen and paper and a quiet place where you can get by yourself and think, or even bring in some people on a team to help you think through it. But just think through as many things as you possibly can. Just brainstorm. Okay, assimilation. What does that need to be what does that need to look like in our church, and what do we need to have an effective assimilation system in our church? And then just start writing down ideas, just random. I mean, as fast as you can think of them, just write them down. And it could be everything from, like I said, an assimilation would be everything from your greeter's first experience, a visitor's first experience in your church, all the way through your new believers class or membership class or whatever you want to call it. So it can be so many different things. And if you just start randomly jotting down ideas, usually after you get your paper filled up with 40, 50, 60, random thoughts about any subject, you're going to see natural categories start to form. And so then you can look at them and say, well, these kind of group together, and we're going to call this, one kind of main objective or whatever. And there's, 18 of my ideas fit in this one category. And then you have this second category here, we're going to call it, whatever. And they kind of group into categories. And so I, say try to find 3 or 4 categories that you can identify out of all those random ideas to start to organize them. And then once you have your major objectives, whether it's 3 or 4, then start setting goals and figuring out how we're going to, do each one of these things, and just make a plan. Just figure out a plan to get from point A to point B through some type of process. And that's a really quick thing on figuring out what it is that we need, basically, and then how do we get there. And then once you figure those things out, then you can get through that process, hopefully. So anyway, I wanted to throw that in real quick because I didn't have time to finish that up in the last session. So this session, we're going to talk about structuring your church for growth. And I want to begin really by just asking you a question that I want you to think about. I don't want you to answer out loud or whatever, because there's going to be a lot of different answers to this question. There's not really any right or wrong, but the question is certainly relevant, or the answer is relevant. But the question is, why aren't most churches growing in America? Why aren't most churches growing? If you look at the statistics, some I have read say as high as 90% of churches are either on a plateau or in decline. That is not encouraging news. I mean, normally, it's you think about the majority is going to be right, the majority is going to be good. In the case of the church, the majority of churches in America, large majority of churches in America, are on a plateau or decline. It's interesting because we have a biblical promise that, in Matthew 16, Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The problem with that is that we kind of take that as kind of like a guarantee that our church can't fail. Well, I mean, we all know churches that have failed. We know churches that have closed their doors. When I was in Oklahoma as state mission director, part of my responsibilities as unfun as it was, unfun? That's not a word either, is it? I did that last session too, whatever the word is, the opposite of fun. Not being fun, non-fun, was helping to close churches and dispose of property and all that kind of stuff. It's not a fun process. Nobody likes to do that. Churches are supposed to be good and exciting and helpful in communities and vibrant and all of that. And just because Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, is not a promise that your church is not going to fail. I mean, Jesus is talking about the universal church, obviously, because any of the churches, even in the New Testament, they don't exist today, and there's not many churches that are going to exist for several hundred years. Some do, and that's fine. In fact, I'm going next month, the end of the month, be going back to my home area, or not really. I mean, I have a long home area thing because I grew up in California, but spent 33 years in Oklahoma. So where I pastored in Oklahoma for a long time, they're having their 95th homecoming, and I'm going and preaching for them at their 95th homecoming, which is cool. But a lot of churches don't make it to 95. A lot of churches, and I read not too long ago, the average lifespan of a church is like 45 years, which is not very long when you think about all of the energy and money and work and everything that's invested in a church. And we need to figure out how to extend life. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to try to figure out how we make our churches healthy, but then we're going to figure out from there, how do we take a church that's struggling? How do we take a church that has lost maybe momentum, they're stuck in a rut, and how do we create momentum? How do we create all that stuff to get it going again? And that's where we're going to go with this particular session this hour. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about lifespans and how we do extend life, or kind of what the principles are behind that, because all living things have a life expectancy. It doesn't matter if it's a human being or if it's a plant or if it's a church. Everything has a life expectancy. And the normal, bell curve in life is that you have something that is born, and then there's a growth period, and then usually there's some kind of, maturity, leveling out of adulthood, but then eventually comes a decline down to death. Now, we don't like to think about the backside of that bell curve, that's decline and death, but the truth of the matter is that all of us are going to face that at some point in our lives physically, and every living thing will eventually have to deal with that. And so that it's all a natural part of the process. But the thing about that is I do believe that we can extend the life of a church just like we can extend our life as a human being through, being healthy. Now, I know God knows all that, and every hair on our head's numbered, and which means some people are going to live a lot longer than others. That was a joke. You'll get it maybe after the carbs settle in. But anyway, it's going to happen, but we can hopefully do some things to live healthier lives while we're living on this earth as humans, the same with the church. So I do believe that the life expectancy of churches can be extended. I think that if we settle in and we just kind of go with the flow and kind of coast along in the routine of things, it's going to shorten our life, just like if we as humans don't pay attention to, exercise and eating healthy and all that. And I am absolutely the best person to tell you about exercise and eating healthy and all that. That was another joke, because I'm not. I'm the worst person to tell you about that stuff. Well, Kenneth is the worst. I'm second to worst. But anyway, we, kidding aside, there is a life expectancy that we have, but I think we can work to extend it. A book that was very influential in my thinking about all of this stuff is Aubrey Malfer's book called Advanced Strategic Planning. And he talks about the life cycle of churches and how to extend the life of a church. And he talks about, uses a ship or a boat in the book as an illustration, and talks about that, even with the kind of the probably most famous, disaster on sea, the Titanic, back in the early 1900s, A lot of people didn't get on lifeboats because they kept thinking this boat's not going to sink. You know, it's the unsinkable ship, right? That's how I guess they kind of marketed this ship. Well, the truth of the matter is, it's a big hunk of steel and it can sink, and it did sink. But until the ship began to really show signs that it was going down, people refused to get on the lifeboats. And that's the way we are in the church today. We think, oh, this church has always been here. It's been here for 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, or whatever. This church is going to always be here. We're going to, somehow survive or make it. And then when things start getting worse and worse and worse, people start bailing at a faster rate, and all of a sudden you're left and you figure out, man, there's nothing left here. And so how do we avoid that? How do we avoid that mass exodus whenever things aren't going the right way, or things don't go the way that people want them to go, or whatever? And so what Malthus talks about in this book, Advanced Strategic Planning, is he talks about how we extend the life on the bell curve. And if you picture a bell curve in your mind, it's just one hump that goes from birth to death. And he says the key to extending life in the church is that you have to figure out some things in the life expectancy or lifespan of the church that extends the life of the church by inserting what's called sigmoid or S-curves. And an S-curve is basically anything in the life of your church that creates momentum or creates excitement. And so that can be anything from starting a new ministry or launching some kind of new program where people get excited. It can be, even a capital stewardship campaign, or hiring a new staff person, or remodeling a building. I mean, it can be almost anything that creates excitement. And so what you've got to do as a church leader, and what you need to try to figure out, are ways to create kind of exciting things or things in your church that your people can get excited about. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of people in your church don't get excited about just the same old thing every Sunday. We as church leaders don't get real excited about the same old thing every week. And so it's creating these S-curves. And so I don't have a diagram. I was working on the PowerPoint. I didn't get finished with this one because I've kind of been redoing a lot of these seminars. But if you picture the bell curve, an S-curve then would just be hopefully on the upswing. When churches are growing or plateaued, it's easier to insert an S-curve than it is when you wait till decline, but it can be done even in decline all the way up to death. It's just probably they're going to be smaller S-curves, and it's going to be a lot harder to kind of reverse momentum. But basically, instead of just a natural hump in a bell curve, you would have an S-curve that skews it up into a trajectory that's going to be going forward, and then you stack those S-curves on top of each other, and so instead of plateauing, you continue to grow. And so if you picture that in your mind on what that would look like on a graph, that's kind of what S-curves are. And so creating S-curves, like I said, can be almost anything in your church. And so you just have to figure out those times of excitement. And those can come through big days, and one thing that I did when I was pastoring in Oklahoma that was turned out to be a good thing for our church. Just to be honest, it kind of had a slow start. People didn't kind of catch on to it real quickly. Nobody really... it didn't have the great immediate results that we wanted to see, but we did see some results from it afterwards, and we called it Outreach Sunday. And what that meant was the last Sunday of every month, we designated that as Outreach Sunday. And what that meant for our church was, I told them that I promise you as pastor, on that last Sunday of the month, we are going to put our absolute best foot forward so that it's a comfortable and a safe Sunday that you can invite your family and friends that don't go to church, and your neighbors, to come to church. And I'm not going to preach on tithing. I'm not going to preach on, talk about church problems, or we're not going to have a business meeting, or we're not going to do anything that's going to embarrass you or anything. Some things you have to do at church, you just have to do it. It may not be exciting. And I promised my people that on this last Sunday of the month, it will always be evangelistic. It will always be outreach-oriented. I didn't tell them this, but we always made sure our best musicians were on the stage that Sunday, just trying to put our absolute best foot forward. And then on the last Sunday, I didn't get up in the pulpit and say, well, welcome to Outreach Sunday. This is a Sunday. It looked like any other normal Sunday, but it was just that safe Sunday. And like I said, it took a little while for that to catch on, but I learned an interesting thing about people in church, and it's so simple that, we think that everybody does it, but the truth of the matter is people don't invite people to church. They just don't do it. And so you have to encourage them to do it. You have to build into your programming, build into your life of your church something that gives people motivation to do those types of things. And so whether it's a friend day or it's some kind of a Sunday school campaign or some kind of a competition or whatever, all those things, I am for anything that's not illegal or sinful, okay? I mean, if you want to have a clown come in and juggle and stuff, if it'll work, do it. What's it going to hurt, If you can have a, whatever, I mean, if it's not illegal or immoral or whatever, do it. Do something to create excitement, to get people, an opportunity to have entry points, into your church and into things. And a lot of times people feel like churches are these closed clubs and you can't really break in. And so whatever you can do to create those points of entry, that's ways that you can insert those S-curves and that you can extend the life of your church. And I asked you the question early on at the beginning of why aren't most churches growing? And I think obviously it's a very complicated answer. There's a lot of different reasons, but I think to simplify it, and if I could put it in one sentence and answer that question, churches aren't growing because they're stuck in a rut. That's why churches aren't growing. And I think that what churches do is they typically get on a course or they get on a path and they just go down that path. It's what's comfortable. It's what we know. It's what everybody is used to. And when you try to get out of the path, that's when people start going, ooh, that's weird. We've never done that before, or I don't like this. This is not comfortable for me, or whatever. And so we start getting these weird, feelings about it. So what it does is it kind of pushes us back in that rut, and we stay on the same path, on the same road, doing the same thing over and over and over again, even though we're getting, no results or terrible results. We stay on that same path. I tell this story, and I've told it all over the country since I've been at Home Missions. It is a true story, and it is the perfect example of what I'm talking about, although it's very unpleasant. I went to a church on a Sunday night, and as I walked into the church, the pastor met me at the door, and he said, "Oh, we're really glad you're here, but man, we've got a lot of people out of place, and our pianist is sick, and she's not going to be here. Our song leader's out of town," and just going through the whole thing. We've all been there. We've all experienced those Sundays, and they're real. We have them. And so he said, "So I know you've got some mission stuff you're going to talk about and all that, and that's great. And so we're just going to sing one verse to one song, and then turn it over to you, and you can have the whole service." Okay, that's great. Give me an hour instead of 30 minutes. I can take it. So the story is, of course, I walk in the church, and it's like, blast from 1950. I mean, nothing had been done in that church literally since 1950 when it was built. And I mean, it smelled bad, it looked bad, it felt bad, it was dark, it was dingy, it just was not a pleasant place. But I mean, I've been in a lot of churches like that, to be honest with you. And so you go in and you just do the thing. So the pastor says, "Well, welcome everyone." And he says, our song director's not here tonight, but he said, "Mama, come up and lead us in a song." Mama was his wife. And so Mama got up and walked up there, and she got her songbook, and she said, "Well, we're just going to do this a cappella, so you just find page, whatever, and we're going to sing just one verse." And honestly, I'm not making fun of this. I'm really not. I'm really using this example because it's important, although I am kind of making fun of them in a way. But, I mean, there was like maybe 15 people total there that night. And so she says, turn to a certain page, and she said, "Well, we need a choir to come help me. So y'all come up to the choir." And so about 10 of the 15 people in the congregation moved from there to up there. Okay, so now there were 5 people here and 10 behind us. And so they sang the first verse of the song, and so she said, "That wasn't so bad. Let's sing the second verse." So we sang the second verse, and then the third verse, and then the fourth verse. And the songs in the hymn book that have 5, 6 verses, we sang them all. So she gets finished with this song, and she says, "You know what? That wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Let's do page whatever, 5 songs, every verse, and we get done with that." And then she says, "The choir is going to sing a special." It's like, the choir's 10 people that was just sitting out here a minute ago. So the choir sang a special. And it was bad. It was not special. Believe me, it was bad. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm just thinking, every Sunday, this is probably what it's like here. It's just what it's like. And so we get finished in the service, and, the preaching was great that night, I might say. Just, I preached, yeah. Yeah, I told you I wasn't as funny as Jim McComas, so I'll lay off the jokes. So anyway, after the service was over, true story, promise you this happened. We're at the back door, or at the door, and the pastor comes to me, and he was as serious as he could be, and he said, I know you travel around to a lot of different churches, and he said, our church is really struggling, and he said, once in a while we'll get a visitor, but they never come back, and I honestly don't know why. And I wanted to say, really? You don't know why? Have you looked? Have you listened? Have you not been paying attention? And so that's a rut. I mean, that epitomizes my point in that every week you do the same thing to please the same people in your church, but it is so comfortable for everybody else. Those 15 people that were there, they thought the service was fine. It's what they do every week. It's what's normal. It's what's comfortable to them. But I promise you, those first-time visitors that once in a while did come to their church, they had the experience I had that thought, wow, this is terrible. I would never go back to that church. If I was just a visitor from the community, I would not want to go back to that church. And so we've got to figure out how to stop doing unhealthy things and start focusing on creating momentum and doing things that are going to help us get back on the right path and get back to doing things that are important, like reaching our community. I mean, how important is it to reach our community? If you're not reaching your community, you're probably not fulfilling your purpose as a church. I'm just saying that's, probably the first thing that you should think about. And so how do we create momentum? How do we create this essential thing to kind of get us on a new path? Well, we're going to talk about that, but I want to talk about a lot of things that kind of will come together here, hopefully. But I want to talk about creating momentum and how that we need to, figure out a way to create momentum. But let me also just put a disclaimer in here and a warning, because when you do things to create momentum, you're going to push people out of their comfort zone. You're going to force people to think differently, act differently, look differently, everything. And some people aren't going to like it. A lot of people like the comfortableness of your everyday routine at your church. And if you're having, if people are being saved and your community's, being transformed or whatever, even if it's not conventional or whatever, if it's working, fine. But my point is, if what you're doing is not working, then you need to try to pay attention to it and do some things differently, okay? So please understand that. And something that is so important for you to understand is that we at National Home Missions or North American Ministries, if you've been around long, it's this home missions, but we are, we're using it in North American Ministries, but it's the same thing. But, and we plant churches all over North America, and I work mainly directly with our church planners. And one of the things that I tell our church planners all the time is we never try to advocate or tell them what kind of a church you need to have, because the church you plant in Irvine, California, which we have, a partnership with you guys, is going to be, hopefully, needs to be completely different than a church that we have in Meridian, Mississippi, or a church that we have in Erie, Pennsylvania, or one in Quebec City, Canada. They need to be different. They need to look different. The style of worship needs to be different. And if you're in a community that has a lot of trendy 20, 30, 35-year-olds, if your church looks like a southern 60-year-old type of church, you're not going to reach those 20, 30-year-olds. You're just not going to do it. And so, we don't tell people you need to have a certain kind of music, or you need to dress a certain way, or you need to, whatever. We don't tell them that stuff, because that is relevant to the community in which you're going to be serving in. And so, look at your community and figure out who your community is and what your community needs and all those sorts of things. And you've got to depend on a lot of that stuff to kind of give direction and to figure out where you need to go. But again, you just have to settle in and realize not everybody's going to like this, okay? Not everybody's going to like it. When I was pastoring, we had an amazing event that kind of turned the course of the direction of our church. And I actually talk about it a little bit in the session that I do on outreach that I'm going to do. I don't know if that's this afternoon or tomorrow, but anyway, when I do the outreach one. And we had this amazing event where hundreds of people responded. I baptized 51 people the next Sunday, in one Sunday. It was crazy. I mean, our church, it literally put us, into the next level overnight. It was a total God thing that could never be duplicated or whatever. It was just that one event that you hope you get to have once in your ministry. And I tell you that because I had this one lady who was a solid lady in our church, and I know she loved the Lord. I know she was sincere, and I know that she meant well, and her heart was, well, I start saying the right place. Maybe it wasn't, but I mean, she had this, honest feeling. She came to me because we'd seen this sudden growth, and a lot of things when people come into the church, they look different, they act different, they don't always know your traditions and all this kind of stuff. And we had, young men walk in the sanctuary with baseball caps on. Oh my, that's, wow. In Oklahoma, southern Oklahoma, that's like, you don't do that. That's like, spitting on your mom or something. I mean, you just don't do it. And so, I mean, but we had people come in the church that had all these problems and all this baggage, and you have to figure out how you're going to deal with all that. And this lady came to me, and she said, I'm just not sure that getting all these new people is a good thing for our church. Let that sink in a minute. What she was saying was, I'm not comfortable anymore. It's not the way I like it anymore. And that is the death of the church, folks. I'm telling you. And I can get on this soapbox and stay here, for the whole hour. I can't. I don't have time. But I'm telling you, in fact, Rick Warren said it, I think, best in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life. If anybody remembers, the opening sentence in that book is, it's not about you. And that's where we've got to get in the church whenever we think about reaching our community and that kind of stuff, is it's not about us. And so we've got to figure out a way to get momentum going and do it in a way where, it's a good thing, because you can't just with reckless abandon say, I don't care what anybody thinks, I don't care what anybody likes, we're going to do it this way regardless. I mean, you can't do that either, because obviously, that would be damaging in a lot of ways. So you've got to be careful about that. But you've got to figure out a way to get people on board and lead people in the right way. I talked in the last session about the chain. If you were in here, I talked about the 8 systems of the church. They form a chain. And the interesting thing about, and I link this together whenever I do this as one long session, but the interesting thing is, how do you move a chain? You don't get behind it and push it, right? Because it's just going to ball up. So you get at the end of it and you pull it. That's how you move a chain. And that's what you have to do as a leader. You have to get people behind you, and you have to pull them along, sometimes very slowly. But if you get behind and try to push, you're just going to ball it up into a big mess, and it's not going to be pretty. So how do you do that? How do you lead the way that you need to lead? Well, I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here and just say most churches have what I call power people. And power people are the people that talk to other people behind the scenes, that have veto power, even though it's not official. They can stop something from happening in your church. You know what power people are? You know what I'm talking about. And so, how do you lead those power people along? How do you make that happen? 'Cause the interesting thing about church, and this session is about structure, and so the interesting thing about our church structure is, we're, as Free Will Baptists, we're congregational rule, and I like that. There's nothing, I think it's a good checks and balances. It's a good congregational, a good government to be congregational rule, but there is a limit to what our congregational rule, I think, should do and should be, because when you talk about leadership and you talk about leaders leading, when God is going to reveal a vision, he's going to reveal it to the leader, okay, or the leaders. And so then we as leaders have to figure out how we're going to pull the others along to lead them along in grasping this vision and all of that. And so, God speaks to the leaders, and then that's why I think there's a fine balance between congregational rule being overkill or being the right thing, because I'm not for just a straight elder-led type church where, the staff makes all the decisions. That's not good for accountability, I don't think, in a lot of ways. But, a church can still be congregational rule and the leaders lead, okay? And I don't have time to get in all the specifics of that. If you want to know more about that, we can talk. But let me just share with you some things about how leaders lead and how this needs to fit into your church structure, because I mentioned in the last session, too, the 8th system is continual evaluation. And I said you need to have a way to evaluate everything that your church does. But the step that I didn't have time to really get into is once you evaluate things in your church and you figure out we've got problems or we need to change something, how does your church make change? How does an idea go from an idea to an implemented thing in your church? For a lot of churches, it's like through this committee, then through that committee, and then vetoed by this power person, and then go, and so it's not seamless, it's not easy. But if you have a structure that allows for change, because you evaluate things on a regular basis, and then you realize certain things that we're doing aren't working or whatever, so we need to change some things. So how do you actually get that done? Let me share with you some steps that I think are important in structuring your church. The first one is in casting vision. The leader needs to be able to cast vision. And I read something, it's been a while back now, several years, but I heard that in order for people to remember your vision, they need to hear it every 30 days. Now that's kind of crazy to me, but basically what that means is you need to remind people in your church every month that our job as a church is to win people and influence our community. We think they should know that, right? We think that there should be some kind of natural givens, but we have to remind them of this stuff every month. So we have to cast the vision. We have to help them see the need. And when our people in our church finally sees the need, then it becomes more than just a vision cast by someone else, but it becomes their vision if they see the need. And so we've got to cast vision to where people see the need, whatever that need might be. And that can be anything, depending on your situation and your context. But we need to help them see the need. We need to share that vision with them with clarity, or it needs to be a clear vision. And that's why I'm big on, like mission statements and vision statements and that sort of thing, because if you have a mission statement in your church, in my opinion, every church's mission statement should be the Great Commission. I mean, that's what we as the church are supposed to do. We are to, you can word it however you want, but we are to win, disciple, or win, baptize, and disciple people, or whatever, across our community all the way around the world. And so that should be our mission statement. That's the what of who we are. Okay, so that's your mission statement. But then your vision statement is kind of the direction on how you're going to get there. So you're once you figure out what you're going to be doing, then you figure out how we're going to get there. And that's where being clear and the clarity of casting and sharing vision with your congregation is all about, and trying to build some sense of unity. Now, unity is kind of a funny thing, especially in the church, because if you have 10 people and you ask them, you're going to probably get 10 different opinions. And so there's, you have to try to figure out a way that even if people don't necessarily agree with every point and step along the way, because of the mission of the church, they realize it's the right thing to do, even though it's not comfortable for them. Okay? Perfect case in point was when I was pastoring. I mentioned the lady that said what she said about she didn't think that all these new people were really, good for our church. I had another lady who was in her 70s. This lady was probably in her 50s, the one I mentioned. I had another lady in her 70s, came to the altar on Sunday morning and prayed, and she filled out a decision card, and she wrote on her decision card, I have committed today that, and I don't remember the exact wording, but basically it said, because our church had really begun growing and some things had started happening and the climate was changing in our church, like I said, and all that kind of stuff. And she didn't like it. It wasn't comfortable for her either. But she wrote on that card, I have committed today that I am going to embrace the change if it helps us reach people. Basically is what she wrote. And I was like, she got it. She got it. A lot of people, didn't get there. It took a long time to get there. But even though you don't necessarily like it, or it doesn't necessarily fit your style or your preference, unity doesn't mean that we have to agree on every point. It just means that we have to agree to accept, to move forward and to get along or whatever. So there's needs to be unity. So you have to, cast the vision for the need and clarify it, but you also have to determine the risk. Determining the risk. You have to count the cost. And of course, we have the, Scripture talks about, tearing down the barns and building bigger barns and about counting cost and all that kind of stuff. We have to be careful that we don't just discard everything with reckless abandon just because we're trying to do a new thing. Now, again, like I said, if something's working in your church, don't stop doing it just because it's old or you've been doing it a long time. Some things work for a long time. But you have to determine the risk of what is it going to really cost us, and not always just monetarily, but what would it cost us if we do decide to move forward with something that a lot of people aren't going to like? You have to determine the risk. Now, let me just say this very carefully. Let me put it this way. Some mountains are worth dying on and some aren't. Okay? And so if there's something that is kind of like fundamental that you need to build other things on to move forward, that may be a mountain or a hill that some people have to die on, and you have to let some people go. And that's hard to let people go. Man, I'm telling you, I've been there. We had a guy one time in our church that left, because he didn't like some things going on or whatever. And they were a good tithing family, and he worked in the church, and she worked in the church, and they were one of those hardworking families. But you know what? After they left, it was like now things can start to happen that couldn't have happened while they were here. And I'm not, please understand what I'm saying. And I hope this recording is working. Testing 1, 2, 3. I am not saying just don't worry about hurting people's feelings and whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, though, there are some things that you just have to count the cost, and there are some times when you have to be willing to let some people go in order, to see the vision accomplished. So you have to determine the risk, and then figure out, how you're going to, make up for the ties you lose and all that kind of stuff. It can be affect a lot of different things. The next step is building a team. What I mean by that is, I don't care how great of a leader you are, you cannot do this stuff alone. You cannot do this stuff alone. Man, I'll tell you what, one of the, some of my biggest heroes, honestly, in the faith are missionaries and church planters. And I say that with all my heart, and I have said that for years, way before I came to this job. Because you talk about hard work for a long time, are the people that go somewhere by themselves and try to dig something out of nothing. Man, I'm going to tell you, it is hard work. And I think one of the best things that we've done recently at Home Missions is sending teams so that one couple is not sent out there by themselves, because nobody can do this by themselves. We're talking about, really building a church like we need to build a church. It just can't be done. It is so important to have a team. And team, it looks so different than individuals do, and there's all kinds of dynamics to that. I don't even have time to get into all of that, but I'm talking to established churches here and stuff for trying to figure out how to fix broken things and move forward. And so let me just say, you need a team. You need a team. And one of the greatest things I think that you can do, and we used to have what we called our strategic planning meeting in October of every year, and I would get like the chairman of our deacon board, the chairman of our trustee board, our treasurer, our Sunday school superintendent, and then 2 or 3 people just at random of different age groups in the church, and we would sit down for an entire day and just brainstorm and plan and think about the next year coming up and plan events, the broad strokes. I mean, we didn't figure out finer details, but just like the broad strokes of events that we were going to do the next year, talk about our services, how our Sunday morning is working out, how our Sunday night was working out, what we did on Wednesday nights, what are some things we need to change. We just did the whole thing, and that team was so instrumental in bringing about some really necessary and needed changes and things that we needed to do in our church, because if you get different age groups involved in that, you're going to get all different perspectives, and I could say a lot about building a team, but get people around you that can help you. You don't have to be great at everything. You just have to know people who can do the stuff, do the things that you can't do. I am definitely not a technological computer person, but my son is, and I call him all the time, or I text him or email him and ask him questions or whatever. And there are, definitely things that I am not good at, but I've identified other people that can help me in those areas, and we need to, draw on those people to build a team. The next step in this, leading kind of road we're going down here is another one. I think I've said this about every point, but it's important. But focusing on excellence. This is another soapbox I could get on that I could stay on a long time. But we in the church have somehow gotten this idea that everything spiritual and at church and everything is kind of second level to everything else, which I don't really get. But I've gone to those churches that I mentioned earlier that look like the carpet hasn't been replaced since 1950. The bathrooms are terrible. They smell funny. They look funny. They're just like nothing's updated or whatever. And yet the people that drive up in the nice new cars to those churches, and I can guarantee you, if you went to their houses, they didn't look and smell and stuff like that church did. But it's just like churches somehow compartmentalize. It's different. It's okay for the church to be old-fashioned and stuck in the past, but I'm not staying there, And somehow we get this idea that there's some separation there, but there's not, because the comforts and everything that people expect at home, they expect at your church. And I could, get on a lot of little nitpicky things here that I don't have time to get into. I do cover some stuff about this in my Creating a Wow Experience seminar that I'll be doing, again, I don't know if it's this afternoon or tomorrow, but there are some things that we do in our church that we need to just, again, examine it, evaluate it, look at it, and then figure out, we can't do it anymore, or we need to change it, or whatever. And when we focus on excellence, sometimes we have to just decide what's most important, and we need to maybe eliminate some things that we aren't doing well, or whatever. And so what I tell our church planners is when they come in for a boot camp and we do our initial training with them, I tell them, you've got to start with two things and only two things. And in fact, I say, don't start with any more than these two things unless you have really exceptional circumstances, but you need to have excellent, great Sunday morning worship, and you need to have a dynamic children's ministry. Those are the two things you have to start a church. Youth ministry can wait a little while, teens. Small groups can wait a little while. Sunday school can wait a little while. There's a lot of important ministries that you need to have, but you've got to have dynamic, good, planned out, done with excellence worship, and you've got to have children's safe, clean, relevant children's ministry and all of that. And so, you can build on that and add other things as you can, as you have finances and volunteers and resources for all that kind of stuff. But if you focus on excellence, you can't do everything well. Okay, you can't do everything well. And so, especially if it's a small church and where you're starting out and you only have a handful of volunteers that are trying to do everything, you're spreading people too thin and you're wearing them out and they can't get stuff done or whatever. So you've got to focus on excellence, decide what is most important. And then there's what I call kill, continue, and create. You need to look at everything you do in your church. Some things you do, you need to kill it. It means you just need to stop doing it. Now, that's a hard thing because some things you need to kill are good things, but they either take too much money or too much time or too many volunteers or whatever, and you just can't do it effectively. You can't do it well, so you need to stop doing it, at least temporarily. So some things you need to kill, some things you need to continue. There are things you're doing now that are good things, that are essential. You need to continue doing it, but you need to kind of take it up to the next level and make sure that it's done with excellence. And then there are some things you need to create, some things maybe you aren't doing now that you need to create and you need to start doing. And so I would challenge you to look at your church, look at everything you do, and say, ask the question: is this essential to our mission? And our mission is what? Fulfilling the Great Commission, right? So is this ministry essential to fulfilling the Great Commission? If it is, you got to do it. And so do it with excellence, do it whatever, put it whatever money and resources and time and everything into it that you can. But there are some things that you can say, does this really help us fulfill our mission, not really in a way that is essential right now, then stop doing it. Save the money, save your workers and all that kind of stuff so they can work harder, and smarter in other areas. And so there's those most important ministries, there's secondary ministries that you can add later. So you've got to focus on excellence in everything. A lot of this focusing on excellence thing and this creating a wow factor that I'll talk about in another seminar is so important today, I think, in our culture because of technology and just of so many things. I mean, when I was a kid, and a few of you will remember this, but do you ever remember watching a TV program and then all of a sudden it just going blank, or the little round, whatever that thing looked like, I don't even remember, there was some like symbol popped on the screen, or sometimes it's just all snowy or whatever. You just sat there for a minute, and then sometimes the picture would come back on. I mean, they're having technical difficulties at, wherever, broadcasting firm or whatever. Do you ever see that today? We never see that today. I mean, it's just like technology is advanced. That was also the days when you had to go and you actually had to turn the channel, and I was the remote when I was growing up, my dad say, hey, get up and turn the channel. And so, we're just so used to things being right there today, on point, perfect like it's supposed to be. And our churches, I know this borders kind of sounding almost like, it's more about programming. I'm not saying that. Please, don't misunderstand that either, because I'm not saying the Holy Spirit isn't important. Of course he is, and speaking to people's hearts and all of that stuff. But we're talking about seminar level stuff here, that trying to, give you the how-tos and all of that. So we've got to focus on excellence, because that's what our culture is used to. And we just can't expect them to have one thing at home and all the, access to excellence and everything that they do, and then come to church and it's like somehow compartmentalized and putting the little flannel graph things up on the flannel graph board. They aren't going to get that, I don't know, maybe they would be, maybe cool and new to them, they've never seen that before. But you get the point. I mean, it's just, we've just got to focus everything on excellence. And so, then we've just got to try to execute that, figure out a way to get it done. And again, that comes through that strategic planning process. I don't have time to get into all of that. Let me talk real quick about cause and effect, because this is really kind of the how-to of getting stuff fixed. And there's really a very interesting story behind how I kind of got into all this. A lot of this stuff I'm going to share with you right now was some stuff that I learned at a seminar from a guy or a training thing that I met, ironically, at a family reunion, my wife's family reunion, actually. And he ended up being a mission director for Southern Baptist in Texas when I was in Oklahoma. And he invited me down for a training that he was doing with some of their leaders. And he talked about cause and effect. And when he talked about it, it just made so much sense to me. But, he called them vicious cycles, and we get in these vicious cycles a lot in our lives. And, you can look at it as a spinning wheel, or you can look at it as a rut. It's all kind of the same thing. Just get a mental picture of what that looks like, in our lives. We go down that path, or we get in that vicious cycle, and we just go round and round and round, kind of like a dog chasing its tail. You're not getting anywhere. You're just spinning the wheels. And that's how a lot of us live at church. We just live spinning our wheels, doing the same thing we've always done with the same results, but we keep on doing it over and over and over and over. That's how most of us live in church. And so how do we break that cycle? How do we reverse momentum? How do we get out of the rut? How do we stop the vicious cycle or whatever? Well, the principle that he taught me that I want to try to help you understand this afternoon, is that once you evaluate everything, and it could be 100 different things, but say you identify some problem in your church, whatever it might be, you have to figure out something that you can, what's called a leverage point. You need to figure out somewhere that you can insert a leverage point that is going to be like, stabbing, the spinning wheel to stop it from spinning. Okay, that's the leverage point. And then you've got to figure out how to reverse it so it starts going the other direction to, get momentum going. And so that would look, like almost anything. It could be 100 different things. But like I said, if you plan well and you really evaluate things and look at things, hopefully you can figure out what that leverage point needs to be. For example, so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's just say for Sunday school, let's say your Sunday school is struggling, you just don't have it's numbers are terrible and people aren't excited about it. There's just nothing happening, whatever. If you really evaluate that and you realize, you know what, we're struggling because we don't have teachers. I mean, we just don't have enough teachers. And so that might be your leverage point. So how do you get more teachers? Well, we need to recruit volunteers better. We need to train them better because people don't feel equipped to teach Sunday school. We need to resource them so that they have something to work with, and we need to send them off to the D6 conference, or Randall House needs to pay me. That's twice I've plugged Randall House today already. Whatever it might be, that's a leverage point to where you can insert that and say, you know what, since we train our teachers now, they feel more comfortable, and we put time limits on it. If you volunteer to take this class, we promise you only have to do it for 1 year, and then we'll give you the option to get out if you want to get out, instead of having to do it till Jesus comes back like most Sunday school teachers do. And so, anything to reverse kind of the wheel or to get out of the rut and to get momentum going in another direction. And so that's really, how cause and effect works. It's just, it's helping people understand that we've got to do things differently to get different results, right? I mean, that Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. If you do the same thing, you're going to get the same results. And so that's why it goes back to what I said earlier. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you find to disagree, but nothing should be off limits as far as ideas or whatever. If you can reach people through having balloons and a clown, have balloons and a clown. If you can reach people through some kind of kids gimmick, have it. If you can reach people through doing a drama on Sunday morning, do a drama on Sunday morning, or whatever. I mean, it's just whatever is going to work in that context. And so you just have to, again, you have to walk through all those things piece by piece and figure out how all the moving parts are going to fit together and all of that kind of thing. And so it starts with the leader. And I'm assuming since you're here, you're the leader, okay? At least you have the ear of the leader if you're here. You guys aren't the average church-going people probably. And so, you've got to be willing to hear the vision from God and then take that and translate it, filter it through the mission of the church and all of that, and through what you're trying to do, get your church on a path that is going to be healthy and moving forward. There's a lot of things that I don't have time to get into. I'd love to talk to you about critical mass, and that's another big problem we have in structure, I think, in our churches, is that we start sometimes too small with things, and we try to start things that aren't really healthy enough or well enough to be out on their own. For example, I mean, you wouldn't take an infant child and say, here, go drive the car. I mean, you can't do that. They don't have the maturity or the tools or whatever to do that. But we do that in the church a lot of times. We put people in positions they don't need to be in. We do certain things before it's really time, and then we see things come crashing down too quickly. And so, there's a lot of things about our structure that we need to make sure that we have in place so that we can properly evaluate, make changes, and all of that. But hopefully you get the big idea. I obviously need to work on trimming some of this stuff down because there's still too much info to try to cram into 45, 50 minutes. But if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm always glad to talk to you one-on-one, help you think through things or understand things a little bit better. But thank you for being here today for this one.